So Casmo, this is a topic that people bring up a lot. Flying helicopters versus fixed wing. What's the difference? You know, because you and I are the exact opposite. I flew fixed wing for a really long time, and then I was like, you know what? Let me try this hovering thing. And you hovered for a really long time, and then decided I'm going to be an airline pilot. Yeah. And then Gonky only hovers when he's ballistic.
I've flown a helicopter once.
Twice. We're going to make that twice soon. We're going to make that 3 times. We're going to make it 3 times as soon as we can get in August,
cool.
Right? August is...
It was really cool. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Casmo, what's your thoughts on this?
I would be interested, like, it's impossible to do, but like compare like your experience transitioning over to mine and see like which one was tougher. Cause I feel like in my head, like it's probably harder to go from jets to helicopters than vice versa. But obviously I don't know. Cause the fundamentally helicopters, I mean, once you get it going, it flies like an airplane for the most part. You know, you turn left, you want to turn left, but it's the hovering part that's weird. So I guess I'm curious, like, how was that transition for you? Did you struggle with it at all?
I did a whole vlog series with Lester, who's an awesome instructor, which, by the way, Lester has, for those of you who don't know, Lester was my instructor. He always wore this big Spaceballs sheriff helmet when I didn't, so it was a big, huge contrast. But Lester will be at Oshkosh this year. He said to go find him and say hi and make sure you say 3Gs top of T, no WCs, which that was his thing, his little mantra for checking your 3 green and the the rotor RPM, engine RPM, all that stuff. But to answer your question, to me, it felt a lot like fingertip. It felt like that level of precision that is required when you're in the weather, flying fingertip, doing maneuvering, stuff like that. It's just these small corrections that you just have to stay on top of. And people talk about the hover button. As soon as you get it, man, it's just, it becomes a thing. I do credit DCS to some degree for helping me because before I took lessons, I did do some Huey flying with JT from Black Rifle Coffee. We did a video, and I think that helped initially, but also, I went out with the Harrison County folks, and the first thing I ever tried to hover was a OH-58A. And, they were like, hey, hands off, he's hovering. And I was like, because I guess intuitively, once you figure it out, it's pretty straightforward, right? Up, down, you just have to be on the pedals. Be on the pedals from a T6 pilot. That was kind of natural, the P factor of the torque and stuff, because you're always doing that. So it's just a lot of fine inputs. What always, and still to this day, if I'm rusty, spot landings with an auto rotation can still get to me. Just timing that out, mostly because of the Robinson, the low inertia. It's tough to figure that out, but I love it. I absolutely, if people ask me, what do you like better? And to me, if I'm going to do a mission, it's a fighter. If I'm going to fly across the country, give me a fatty, give me a heavy. But if I'm just flying around for fun, give me a helicopter all day long, every day. That is flying. That is backcountry, having a good time. So, I mean, does that jive with what you experienced? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, it's funny you said something that I didn't really think about. Coming from the type of jets that you flew, where obviously I've never flown one of them, but my understanding is there's very little movement in the controls. Like, it's very precise type movement, versus a 7.3 where you're over here, doing this and it's barely moving, but you're yanking it around. So to transition from flying something, like if you're just like a Cessna dude, and then you go fly helicopter, it's a completely different level of control. And I think that's where people kind of trip up with it, because it is such fine movement. You're barely moving the cyclic for the most part. And so it is kind of like what you're saying, trying to fly, close formation, or I'm sure tanking is probably kind of the same way. So coming from that background helps, but understanding the aerodynamics, again, in flight, probably the weirdest part of the helicopter is just because the aerodynamics, at least sort of conceptually, changes, right? Because you're hovering and things, you go cyclic to the left, the aircraft's going to do something completely different than it does when you're in forward flight. And so making that transition, and I always found it, even with the years and years that I flew, the opposite transition, going from forward flight to a hover, that's where sometimes it could get you. Is trying to make your brain change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you got to be
stuff,
careful.
Bad
right?
stuff can happen. Yeah.
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 And that, I mean, that carries over to the jet. I mean, that's the hardest part. I think most helicopter guys that I've talked to that have gone to airlines, that's what we struggle with, is slowing the jet down, because we're just not used to, you know, I'm used to just yanking back in the nose, and we're just going to slow down, and you can't do that with the jet. And I've catch myself sometimes pulling back, and I'm like, no, don't do that. You know? So yeah, that's probably the weirdest part for me, but I agree with you. Like, I miss flying helicopters. I love it because it is so much fun. Flying the big jet is, you know, it pays the bills, you know. But flying helicopters is a lot of fun. So Gonky, you got to get some more.
So Kazma, I've never flown a helicopter, but I had about 800 hours of just single engine piston time as like a CFI and stuff. So I'm curious, when you started flying jets, did the increased envelope affect you? Meaning, like, probably in a helicopter, you didn't go higher than 1,000 feet, right? Probably didn't go faster than 150 knots, maybe. Like, did you have a hard time, like, figuring, like, is that? I know I did. Like, when I remember flying the T-37 and T-45, and I still had 100 knot brain going on, and and I was just curious, is that hard?
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny, I can walk that all the way back to when I first joined the Army. You know, you're all trained to be like infantry guys, and you're thinking like that 2 miles an hour. And then I was a tank guy. And so we'd be, you know, moving 20, 30 miles an hour. And that transition of like, I remember the first time doing mounted land nav, and my ability to keep track of myself on the map was completely screwed up because I was still thinking so slow. So what you're saying, 100%. I mean, I constantly like quiz myself, like in flight, I'll look at the ground speed and I'll just start working out the math. Like, okay, how fast am I moving per minute? And trying to figure out, okay, if I needed to descend, you know, because I don't want to be caught with my pants down when they sit and like, oh, do I go vertical speed? You know, all this stuff. But yeah, 100%. The brain transition. And I've only been flying jets now for just a little over a year, and I still feel like I'm, you know, way back there. You know, I could do the basics, but when ATC throws something crazy at me, I'm looking at the captain like, what button? So, I know the feeling. That's a true statement. Yeah.
You're flying a Steam 737 though, so that's probably valid for anybody. That's
bless you.
LNAV, VNAV path. What now? What's it doing?
Yeah, it's like I jump in. I'm like, oh, good, the Memphis Bell again. Yeah, we've got some with EFIS and everything, but yeah, when you get into the steam gauge 7.3, and it's usually like we have those on like our VIP flights, and so we're taking like sports teams to like these tiny little podunk town, you know, airports. They're really small and it's dark, and I'm like, man, I can't even. I'm looking at the iPad so I can figure out where I am. Yeah, it's rough. Makes you a better pilot.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what they always say. I do think being a helicopter pilot has made me a better pilot. I think being able to do multiple, you know, having a larger breadth and depth of experience is a good thing. And I appreciate it. I mean, I appreciate my time in helicopters. A lot of people say, oh, it's dangerous or whatever. But I think people misunderstand, because, you know, there's a lot of mystery behind how the helicopter actually works. You know, they misunderstand the fact that, you know, it's almost the same as just flying a single engine Cessna. You know, you've got the same risk factors. You have to be in practice. You have to do all the different things safety wise. But I would rather put a helicopter into a field than a Cessna. You know, because I think, you know, as far as what happens if I miss, I mean, an auto rotation versus something else, as long as I maintain my energy, you know, it's different. But cool. Well, any other reattacks on that, fellers? No?
Mark's
Okay.
complete.